You would think that when it comes to something as final as death, the system would be foolproof. But instead, for every 7 executions in America, 1 on death row has been found innocent. This means that in the past 25 years, 74 men have been sentenced to a wrongful death. This is my rebuttal to the New York Times article, The Humane Death Penalty Charade. Although I agree with the statements made in this article, I think it is not sufficient enough for the immenseness of the topic that is the death penalty. The main claim in this article is insufficient and does not cover all the counter-arguments that could be made. The death penalty is a widely debated subject that can be easily refuted. The author needs to talk about these claims to avoid any problems that may arise with people that disagree. This argument points out many problems with the death penalty, but does not really have any credible sources, which could make the author's credibility be lowered. First of all, this article doesn't go into detail about the drug makers mentioned and doesn't have any reliable evidence. Although this editorial does point out problems with the procurement of these lethal drugs that I do agree with, it doesn't have any credible source to back it up. The author doesn't cite anyone when talking about how Oklahoma gets the drugs, so we have no proof that it's actually happening. What has actually been happening is that European countries have stopped selling lethal drugs to America, and in particular the states that use lethal injection. This is to avoid any legal or moral complications in the future, like lawsuits. In 1985, in the landmark case Heckler v. Cheney, the Supreme Court agreed that the regulation of the lethal drugs should be under the FDA, or the Food and Drug Administration, but the FDA declined, saying that this wasn't under their jurisdiction. This means that the lethal drugs we use today are not regulated as much as they should be. Next, this article also offers a middle ground for humane or pain-free executions, and the possibility of making that an option. This author should not have a middle ground when it comes to this issue. It is completely going against what they're arguing for. In fact, since 1976, nearly half of all the executions in the United States have been done wrong. Obviously, these deaths haven't been pain-free or humane. In bodies immediately after executions, doctors measured the post-level mortems of a chemical called thiopental, which makes an inmate unconscious. 43% of those inmates had levels so low that they may have been awake and even aware what was happening while the process was going on. Imagine being conscious but paralyzed and being unable to move or speak out. These people that experience this are able to feel the lethal drug take control of their body and burn throughout them. With the amount that the author talks about the cruelties resulting from botched lethal injections, they never really mention anything about cruel and unusual punishment. Since it seems that many of these executions have been made to be a very painful process, shouldn't this be ruled out by the 8th Amendment that prohibits this? The 8th Amendment is brought up a lot in the death penalty debates. The author should have recognized this and preemptively argued for this argument's validity. Professor Deno, an esteemed law professor, says that the 8th Amendment never really says whether or not pain is necessary, but whether there are alternatives. But there are alternatives to what we do now. Instead of executing a person, we can instead let them live the remainder of their lives in jail. Doesn't that seem like a more humane thing to do? And to the severity of the cases as well as the sheer number of botched lethal injections, the system we have in place now should be considered cruel and unusual. Overall, this editorial has the right idea, but could have used better arguments and references. Hopefully soon there is a resolution to this humane death penalty charade.